The hoi hoi. Okay, we have to talk about the annual Sydney Duck Fashion Show. Almost every year in Sydney, Australia, over 900,000 visitors go to the Pied Piper Duck Show because, well, Australia can't help but outdo itself with its zaniness over and over again. As you probably guessed from my extremely excited intro, the Pied Piper Duck Show is a duck fashion show of epic proportions. For over 30 years, many a duck has had custom clothing made for them just so that these ducks can strut their stuff one day a year. There's a huge variety of clothes, from wedding dresses to detective outfits to whatever the heck this is. And that variety of outfits is what keeps attracting visitors. And just like the people who dress up these ducks in fabulous new fashion every single year, us sound designers need to focus on dressing up our work as well. No matter what kind of project you're working on, being able to create a variety of sounds in whatever it is you do is hugely important to becoming a pro sound designer. And that lack of variety is something that I see on people's demo reels all the time, and it can be an instant deal breaker for someone looking to hire a sound designer. So let's get into how to create this variety in our work so our projects can be as prim and proper as these fabulous fowls. So here's what we're going to be covering today. Part 1, the importance of variety in our sound design. Part 2, common variation techniques. And Part 3, how this variety can be used in a real game project. Every single one of us knows what it's like to hear the same sound over and over and over again. And while sometimes that repetition can be charming, it often ends up as an annoyance, or at least sticks out in an unpleasurable way, if nothing else. To avoid annoying people with our sounds and making our games come across as more polished, having variety in our sound design is key. Most of the time, you're not going to be playing a well-made game and be cool with one gunshot, or one footstep, or one line of dialogue. Otherwise, that game would probably be awful. So how do we give more variety to our sounds? Well, there are a ton of different ways, but today we're going to cover 2 of the most common methods there are. And if you want to dive really deep, I have a sound design course coming out later this year. If you want to get on the waiting list, just sign up for my newsletter in the description below. But anyway, to start with how we're going to add more variety to our sounds, we are going to approach it from the angle of layering. If your sounds have a multitude of layers, which most of them will, then it becomes really easy to actually start adding more variety into them. Let's say we're working on something like a sci-fi gunshot. You can start adding more variety to your sound just by adjusting the timing of some of the layers. And from there, you can go on to automating the effects and pitches of some of your layers as well. Having a sound with multiple layers and keeping a few of the layers the same and changing up other ones throughout each variation works incredibly well for keeping our sounds the same but also different across each variation. This prevents us from needing to repeat the same sound over and over and over again. But alas, there's no one right way to switch these layers out. You're going to need to experiment on which layers should stay and which layers should change between each of your variations. It'll depend on the sound you're making and how different each variation needs to be and what kind of project you're working on. Also, time and budget constraints are a thing too. And yes, there are plugins that can help you do variations on your sounds like Nuendo's Randomizer, but those are kind of hit or miss. Now, it goes beyond the scope of this video to show you how I'm processing each of these layers and how I'm adding more variety through my plugins and through my effects, but just leave a comment down below if that's something you'd like to see me teach in future videos. But let's start talking about doing this on a real game project. If you're working on a project that's using middleware like Fmod or Wise, which by the way are just pieces of software that allow us as non-programmers to set up the logic and way our sounds and music will behave in a game, then there are some ways to create and add this variety into our sound design without needing to export every single variation by hand. In fact, if we are in one of these situations where we're working on a real game and want more variety out of our sounds, whether we're using middleware or we're using some native tools in Unity or Unreal, then we want to start thinking of exporting some of our sounds in terms of layers and not in terms of complete sounds. Doing so allows us to get tons of variety out of our sounds automatically. For example, if we're working on a sci-fi gunshot and we have 3 high layers, 3 middle, and 3 low layers, instead of shuffling each of these layers around into every single variation, we can actually export each of these layers individually in their individual categories. So in this case, we'll have 3 high layers, 3 middle layers, and 3 low layers. This way, our layers can match up with each other other dynamically without us needing to export every single variation by hand. Our engine or middleware can actually cycle between these and match them all up dynamically, meaning each time you shoot this gunshot, high layer 1 might match with middle layer 3, which might match with low layer 2. And then the next time you shoot it, high layer 2 might match with middle layer 3, which might match with low layer 1. So you can see this automatically adds a lot of variety just like that. So if you have middleware, you can do this very easily, or you can check with your team to see if the programmers are willing to support you in getting this feature. Now, a big mistake I see with sound designers when they're trying to create more variety in their sound is that they just take an entire sound, pitch it up or pitch it down and just call it good. Now, don't get me wrong, adding some pitch variation to a sound can go really far, especially if it's on individual layers instead of the whole sound. But nowadays with things like middleware or even built-in features to game engines like Unreal and Unity, we can do pitch shifting pretty much automatically. So while it can work and can be a really good feature, don't rely on it as your main way of getting variety out of your sounds. But it costs you $25,000 scoop of gold fleck chocolate custard, you say. I don't even have recordings or libraries to start working with, so how dare you tell me to add variety to my work? Well, don't worry your pretty little head about it. You can actually get the Sonus GDC bundle of sound effects completely for free. This will set you up with over 135 gigs of sound effects. That's more than enough to get started, and even more than enough to do a lot of professional work. So with that, let's go over what we covered today. Number 1, variety is ultra important in our work as sound designers. Number 2, playing the same sound back to back is usually a big no-no in sound design, though sometimes it can be charming. Number 3, 2 of the most common techniques in sound design and getting variety out of your sounds is changing the timing and changing the layers of your sound effects. Number 4, you'll want to start exporting your sounds as layers whenever possible as you work on more and more game projects that allow for this. And number 5, I have no idea if there's a winner of the duck fashion show, but by God, I'm gonna dress my dog up next year and we're gonna win. So while we may not be designing a bunch of dresses for a bunch of ducks, variety is still super important to our work, and making sure that we don't repeat our sounds over and over and over again will give us that professional high quality sound. And if you want to learn the basics of that whole layering thing that I talked about in this video, then you can check out my video on the HMLS technique right here. That video will teach you how to create high quality layered sound effects super quickly and super easily. All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Go pet a dog.